Hey guys, this is Josh here with Trillium Wild Edibles, and today I wanted to take some time to do a quick Q&A video for all of you because I've gotten a fair amount of questions over the time I've had my YouTube channel. Some of the questions that I have here are extremely common that I get on my channel, but also common questions that I'll get in the real world whenever people will ask me in person some of these questions. So I hope all of you guys enjoy it, and let's get right into it. This is one of the most popular questions that I get, especially on my YouTube channel or online, is where are my videos filmed, where do I forage, and where do I live? Honestly, I'm not going to tell you exactly where I live for safety reasons. However, my videos are filmed in central Indiana, and some of them are right below the cusp of central Indiana entering southern Indiana. So my videos are filmed in central and southern Indiana, usually speaking. Where do I live? I live in central/southern Indiana. It's basically that simple. However, where do I forage at? I forage in a lot of places, from private property to public property, like city parks and state forests, not state parks because that's illegal. Those are generally the places I forage, and I'm not going to give the exact forests that I forage in or the exact parks that I forage in, mainly because I don't really want to deal with people trying to hound me and trying to, follow me around at those places or try to stalk me at those places. I don't think most of my viewers or subscribers would ever do a thing like that. But you never really know because the internet's a pretty crazy place. However, I do try to avoid any land that's illegal for me to forage on. So like private property, for example, I always get permission from the landowner before I forage anything. And I also tell that landowner what I plan on foraging and how I plan on foraging it. If I'm going to a state forest or a city park, I make sure that I'm following the laws on the books in my state, Indiana, on what is acceptable and legal for me to gather at those public places. And I never gather things from those public lands that is illegal. However, in Indiana, the laws for that haven't been updated since like the 70s. So it's really inefficient and extremely old and outdated. I would love to be able to change those laws in some way, but I don't know that I have the means to do it. So originally, whenever you're foraging, try to find an area that you have legal means to forage on, and then do your foraging that way. It'll take a lot of research. It'll take a lot of looking up things online through your state governments, through your city governments, through the DNR, through the Department of Resources, whatever you have in your state or province, make sure you look at all of those things. But essentially, that's where my videos are filmed, and that's where I forage. This is another really common question that I get. How do I keep bugs and ticks off of me? I don't. That's the straightest answer I can give is I don't. I'm always wearing shorts if the weather is warm enough, and always wearing a t-shirt. If the weather is warm enough, I'm wearing shorts, t-shirt, and moccasins, and that's it. I go out in all kinds of places. I hike miles off trail wearing just leather moccasins that I made myself, wearing gym shorts, wearing a t-shirt. That's usually my clothing. I don't use bug repellent. A lot of people are amazed that I don't use bug repellent, but the reason I don't use bug repellent is simply because the soap I wash myself in whenever I take a shower reduces human odor or prevents bugs and ticks and mosquitoes from wanting to land on me. An example of that would be this. If I want to remove human odors, which is one of the things that insects are attracted to, minus some are obviously attracted to our sweat and the heat coming from our body and the carbon dioxide that we emit whenever we breathe, that can't really be eliminated all the time. But what can be is the natural human odors that those same insects will generally follow so they can bite us and suck our blood. Mosquitoes, for example. Dead Downwind brand soap, it's used for hunting, so any scent elimination soap that hunters use is excellent for removing human odors. Lye soap, traditionally made lye soap, also works really well for reducing the odors, the human odors that insects are attracted to. Another soap that I use is Dr. Bronner's peppermint soap. Now, I'm not sponsored by any of these companies. This is just the stuff I like to use personally. But Dr. Bronner's peppermint soap, it's a Castile-based soap. The peppermint odor is so strong on that soap that it also prevents a lot of insects from wanting to attack me. The other thing that I use is I use a black African charcoal soap. I don't remember the name of the company, but it is an African-made soap that's made using charcoal. I use that mainly for my hair as shampoo, which it is shampoo, but that charcoal odor helps to eliminate a lot of natural human oils and odors in my hair that may attract certain insects. That's really it. The shorts are a really good way to keep ticks off of you, though, because you can see the ticks on your legs if you have shorts. Plus, if you're wearing pants, folds and wrinkles on your clothing will actually simulate and feel like ticks and bugs, so it's really hard to determine whether you have a tick on you or not underneath a pair of pants. So I'm always wearing shorts because most of the ticks that will get on me are coming from around my ankles. So, since they're coming around my ankles and they have to curl up a bare leg on my shorts, I'm able to see them, feel them, and just brush them right off in the woods. Over the past 5 years, I've brought in 2 ticks home with me. One of those was in my wallet, believe it or not. The other one was in my backpack. They weren't on me. I have never brought a tick home on me in over 5 years. Now, have I had ticks on me when I've gotten home before? Absolutely, it has definitely happened, and it will from time to time. But I'm frequenting a lot of places where ticks are really prevalent, especially deer bedding areas. Ticks are really prevalent there. Wearing shorts, going through those areas, not a problem because, yeah, I might get 10 ticks every step I take, but I can brush them all off. So that's how I keep the ticks and the bugs off of me. This is another really common question that I get is, how can I handle poison ivy? How am I not allergic to poison ivy? It's possible to not be allergic to poison ivy? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Not every person is allergic to poison ivy. It does have a very strong reputation for being a noxious allergen because it really truly is. However, not every person is allergic to it. There are people all over the world who don't have an allergic reaction to urushiol or the active chemical constituent oil, if you will, in the plant poison ivy that causes this allergic reaction. Some people have a horrendous reaction to poison ivy or urushiol. I do not. I just lucked out and I'm not allergic to very many things. Honestly, I'm allergic to olive oil, but I'm not allergic to poison ivy. I'm not allergic to almost any plant out there that I've ran across. That doesn't mean that it won't happen because I've obviously never touched or consumed every plant that has ever existed. So I'm sure I'm allergic to some plants. But I've lucked out for the most part because I don't really have an allergy to a lot of different things. Like I said, olive oil for me is something that gives me hives if I eat it too much for a long period of time. But I can eat some food with olive oil from time to time. Whenever I go out to eat at a restaurant, I know there's olive oil in it. If I eat at that restaurant frequently, I will start to get hives. However, if I eat it once or twice in a great blue or pink moon, I'm probably not going to be getting hives. So I've lucked out, and I remember it was probably 2007, 2008, I went to an allergen specialist because I had a problem with hives and allergies all the time. I was having full body hives pretty much 24 hours a day, and that persisted for around 3 to 5 years. I was allergic, according to this allergen specialist, I was allergic to every blade of grass and every species of tree that they had tested me for. So I started spending more time outside. As I spent more time outside, those allergies went away. I went back to that same specialist, we did the test again, and I no longer had those allergies. And I asked him if it's possible that maybe there was something else that I was doing or eating or exposed to that was bringing out those allergies. So basically, whenever it comes to allergies, you can be allergic to one thing that kind of rides under the radar and then will bring out allergies in everything else when you may not actually be allergic to those other things. So that is something to keep in mind. A lot of people are highly allergic to poison ivy. Thankfully, I'm not. But yeah, I handle poison ivy all the time. All the time. I'm always ripping it out of people's yards or in my yard or my grandmother's yard because there's a lot of kids over there all the time, and I don't really want anybody getting exposed to that. So from time to time, I frequently am touching poison ivy and ripping it out, bare hands, no gloves, but I don't recommend that everyone do that. I will also frequently handle poison ivy whenever I'm teaching somebody about the plant because it's easier to show them a plant with me touching it and moving it around than it is me just simply pointing at it and them keeping a distance. Usually people look at me like I'm crazy when I do it, but I don't really care because I know I'm not allergic, and if they are allergic, I will never touch them after I've touched that plant. So there are some leeways here, and you do have to be very cautious. This question's kind of common that I've gotten a couple times on my YouTube channel. I can't find all of these questions, but a lot of people wonder, is Lobelia inflata Indian tobacco? Absolutely. Indian tobacco is another common name for Lobelia inflata. I always call it Lobelia, though it is called Indian tobacco. It's also called emetic root, emetic plant, puke plant, vomit plant, and a bunch of other things. Common names are extremely ambiguous, and they change by geographical region and the person that you may be talking to. So common names are generally considered taboo in the subject of foraging. I like to use common names because they're easier for people to remember than a bunch of Latin and stuff like that. Does Latin have its place? Absolutely, especially when it comes to plants. I don't prescribe to that kind of belief because if someone follows all of the right steps of proper identification and safe foraging, they're not going to consume any plant that they don't know what it is. And in my opinion, if you've done all of the research, you're going to know that, hey, it looks similar, but it doesn't have this feature and it doesn't have that feature, so it probably isn't this exact species. But yeah, to answer that question, Lobelia inflata is Indian tobacco, and I frequently use Lobelia inflata for various things. It is one of my favorite medicinal plants. It's not one that I would recommend everybody use because it can be dangerous if used improperly. However, I frequently enjoy it. Now, why does it have the name Indian tobacco, you might be wondering? Well, honestly, because this plant is considered sacred to especially Native Americans east of the Mississippi. It was something that they combined with willow bark, barberry bark, yarrow, mullein, lobelia, those things, wild lettuce. A bunch of plants were combined together for smoking mixtures. Not always for conventional use like we think of cigarettes and tobacco today, but ceremonial and sacred uses and medicinal uses. Native Americans would smoke various plants for those things. Europeans, coming across the Native American tribes, anything they smoked was considered a form of Indian tobacco. And that's really a large misnomer. It's not accurate in any way because they didn't use it like we do tobacco, which we got from the Native Americans. However, if you do combine Lobelia inflata with mullein, dried mullein leaves and flowers, you got a pretty good herbal smoke. It's really nice, actually, really calming, but it's also not something that's going to affect you psychotropically in really any large way. However, if you add yarrow, dried yarrow to your mullein and lobelia, you are going to get some euphoric feelings. You are going to feel a little high, a little buzzed. You're going to get some good feelings. However, if you combine just lobelia and mullein, you've got something that you could roll up into like an herbal cigarette, and a lot of people have used the two to quit smoking regular tobacco. Back in the 70s, they thought it was because of lobeline instead of nicotine. Lobeline is a chemical cousin of nicotine, but they do not react the same way within the human brain. So you might try it if you want to quit smoking. But yeah, Lobelia inflata is Indian tobacco. Absolutely. This is one of those questions that I get a lot whenever I'm talking to people in the real world about plants and identification of them and things like that, they always ask me, is there any one source to help identify any plant that I come across? No. Period at the end, no. There are over 100,000 different species of plants on the planet, and to have one book or one website that comprised all of them down, every species, it's impossible. It would take way too much space, and it would take way too much time, and there are still plants that are being discovered. So, no, because you could be in South America and maybe you come across a plant that science doesn't know of yet. Well, they can't tell you how to identify it if they don't know of it. So, no, it doesn't exist. Are there books that have a large variety of plants in them? Absolutely. Absolutely. But there are so many variations of different species that it becomes really difficult and impossible physically to contain all of those into one source, like a book, a magazine, a field guide, or a website, or a web page, or even a YouTube video. It's just physically impossible. I wish it existed, but man, if it was a book, it'd have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. The book itself would be more thick than I think the legislation for Obamacare. Not to get political, but I'm just saying Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, had a lot of pages. I mean, its pages were stacked several feet high. For a book to do that, it would be a book that's several feet tall. I don't know of any publisher that would publish a book like that. I get this question all the time from beginners and novices and other people who are really curious about foraging and they want to do it safely. They always ask, have I ever gotten sick while foraging or from foraging? Well, yes and no. There's been times when I've been out foraging and I had a little bit of stomach upset, but I already had that stomach upset nausea feeling before I left to go foraging. The nausea didn't come from me eating a different plant or from eating a new plant. So I've never gotten sick from foraging, but I have been sick while foraging before. There are times when I have diarrhea or influenza or whatever, and I'll go out foraging anyways. So I've been sick while foraging, but I've never gotten sick from foraging because I follow the number one rule. And that number one rule is to never consume anything unless you 100% know what it is and that it's safe to consume. But knowing that it's safe to consume doesn't mean you won't be allergic or have an allergic reaction to it, especially if you're eating multiples of plants at once that you've never eaten before. So make sure you keep that in mind when you are foraging. Now for number 7, I have gotten this question a lot on my YouTube channel, but I also get it a lot in the real world too. A lot of people ask, how do I dry my herbs and how well do they hold up? I dry my herbs, honestly, in the most ghetto way possible. The cheapest, most ghetto way possible. I don't have some super nice herbal drying rack that I made out of wood and screens and all that fancy stuff. I just don't. I have an apothecary cabinet where I keep my dried herbs and the tinctures that I'm making before I've drained those tinctures and add them into tincture jars. So for my completing tinctures and my fully dried herbs, I store those in my apothecary cabinet. But for the actual drying process, I just use some plastic Rubbermaid totes with some holes cut in the side. I usually string rope up across the top of the lid so I can tie those herbs or clip those herbs to that string across the top, and bammo. I also have a food dehydrator that I will use, but I don't plug in that food dehydrator when I'm drying herbs because most of the herbs need to dry slow over a long period of time. When it comes to drying herbs, there's a lot of technicalities here. There are some basic rules of thumb that every person can follow to ensure success with almost every plant that they are harvesting, whether it's a shoot, a stem, a leaf, a root, a bulb, a tuber, a corm, a rhizome, a flower, a whole plant. It doesn't matter. You can follow these basic rules of thumb. And those basic rules of thumb are this. Make sure that the temperature in your drying environment or your drying box does not surpass 75 degrees Fahrenheit and it doesn't go below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. I try to keep 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit as far as a temperature. Humidity is a major factor when it comes to drying herbs over a long or fast period of time. And this may not always be applicable, but try to keep the humidity in your drying box or your drying environment from 50% humidity up to 60% humidity. Try not to go over or below that, but sometimes that's out of our control, especially in the winter if you have gas heat. It's going to be really difficult to control that. However, there are dehumidifiers and humidifiers that will work very well. Sometimes if it's really hot in the summer and the temperature in my house is really high, I'll have to add a fan next to the box to help cool down the box itself and to also provide a slow breeze. And I'll dry my herbs in this manner usually for 2 to 3 weeks until they're completely dry. I check them every other day and I turn them every other day. This will ensure that the plants are drying evenly. It also helps me to investigate them every other day to make sure mold or mildew isn't starting to set in. The reason I dry my herbs in an enclosed environment is simply because I have a cat, and I don't want cat fur in my medicine, and I don't want dust in my medicine. So I can clean out these totes very quickly, swipe them down with some vinegar or some bleach water, and bam, they're good, they're clean, done. That's generally how I dry my herbs. It's really easy, really fast, and extremely cheap. A Rubbermaid tote can be bought at Walmart for like $5. $5 and some string laying around your house, boom, you got a drying box. Super easy. Now, how well do they hold up? That ties in with how you dry your herbs, but honestly, most of the herbs that I've ever dried will last from 2 to 5 years in the jars, so they hold up extremely well. But I've also spent a lot of time learning how to dry herbs and plants to ensure that they don't mold and mildew. That's the reason why I dry them slowly over a long period of time. And then there is a subject called curing. Those of you who grow a plant called cannabis probably know of this thing, this process called curing. The same process actually applies to medicinal plants too, because cannabis is a medicinal plant. So once you've dried your herbs, whether it be your lobelia or your boneset or your dandelion, once you've dried it, it's still going to have some residual moisture in it, and you want it to still have some residual moisture. You put your herbs into a jar once they've been dried most of the way, and then you open that jar up every day for about 5 minutes or so, and you do this over a period of a month. Over that period of a month, the rest of the herb and moisture will slowly get out of the herb, but it will also re-moisten the rest of the herb. So the herbs aren't extremely brittle and they don't turn into powder by the time they're done, and they're also not so wet and moist that they mold or mildew while you store them over a period of a couple of years. So in my opinion, they hold up really well, but it's just because I've spent some time in gathering and harvesting and processing and drying and curing all of these different plants. There are exceptions. Earlier I mentioned boneset. Boneset generally likes to dry fast. Dandelion root, it's better to dry your dandelion root fast than it is slow, but it is still possible drying it in a slow way. So make sure you keep that in mind, that every plant requires being dried in a different manner. Number 8 is an extremely common question that a lot of my friends and family have asked me before, and I get on my YouTube channel frequently as well, is how did I learn this subject and all of the plants that I cover in my videos? I am 100% self-taught. I have not gone to college for this subject or any subject for that matter. I have never, ever taken a college course. I have never been to college. I learned this subject through a lot of diligence and a lot of time outdoors in the woods with a lot of trial and error. I have a lot of books. I started foraging in 2008, and I only had 2 books at that time. I used those books to the best of my abilities. Then, once I got internet access, I started employing the internet and YouTube to help teach me about wild edibles. Doing that, I was able to learn what I know now, and as my knowledge grew, I had more of an understanding of how to research this subject online and find accurate information. And I'm still learning plenty of things about plants. I learn things from my viewers and my commenters all the time about plants that I have never known. So, not every person will know everything. Nobody will. I don't consider anybody an expert in anything because to me, an expert indicates that they know everything about that subject. That's entirely false and physically impossible. Not any person will know everything about any given subject. There are a lot of people who are extremely knowledgeable in certain areas of foraging and those who aren't so knowledgeable in other areas. A good example would be John Callis, one of the authors of one of my favorite wild edible books. He's a PhD in nutrition, but he doesn't know much about medicinal uses of plants. Does he know something? I'm sure he does. But he doesn't cover them in his books because he doesn't know much about them. So even though he knows a lot about the nutrition inside of a plant, he doesn't always know the medical constituents of any given plant. But yeah, I mean, that's basically how I learned this subject, was just through a lot of trial and error and a lot of time. I remember in the year 2013, I had walked over 1,000 miles in the woods and was spending 40 or 50 hours a week in the woods foraging and harvesting and gathering and preparing plants. That's how I learned this subject, was by spending time outside and literally spending time with the plants and the subject. Sometimes I've gotten this question from some of my friends, a couple family members, but I've also gotten it a couple times on my YouTube channel. And that is, do I have to buy food from the grocery store, and would it be possible to not have to? Technically, yes, it could be possible to not have to buy food from the grocery store. To do so, you would have to do a lot of foraging, a lot of hunting, and a whole lot of gardening. You would have to supply everything you and your family need for an entire year. That's not really feasible in this modern day and age. Is it possible? Absolutely. But it's not for everybody. And do I still buy food from the grocery store? Oh, hell yeah, I do. I'm not cutting out my broccoli, I'm not cutting out my turkey, and I'm not cutting out my pork, I'm not cutting out my bacon, I'm not cutting out my chorizo. I'm not cutting out baked beans and black beans and basmati rice and all that other stuff. No, I'm not cutting it out. Period. Dot. The end. I really, really enjoy food of all kinds, whether wild or domestic. A lot of our domestic fruits and vegetables and produce have a lot of great benefits to us, and they're easier to find and come across because we can go to the store and buy them than having to find a substitute out in the wild. Do wild plants have their place? Absolutely. Whenever they've been studied, wild plants actually have more nutritional value than most of our domestic produce. But just because it's from the wild doesn't make it healthier for you, and it also doesn't mean that you should try to live off of just that. If you're able to spend 60 hours a week in the woods, foraging and hunting and trapping, and then several hours a week gardening at your home, you probably wouldn't have to buy very much or anything from the store. But that's not really applicable because most of the people learning the subject are learning. They're beginners. We're all beginners at one point, and for a beginner, that's physically impossible. Even for the largest and most popular foragers and wild edible enthusiasts and whatever on the subject, a lot of those guys still definitely buy domestic produce and still love domestic stuff at the grocery store too. We add wild edibles and medicinal plants to those domestic foods to aid our nutrition, to aid our diet, and to also cut down cost of those foods. Because let's face it, grocery store prices have risen tremendously, and foraging is a great way to offset that cost. And that's how I think people should use foraging for food or medicine, is use it to offset the cost of what you use instead of trying to rely upon it for your sole means of survival. Every now and again, I'll get someone asking me if I use organic alcohol for my tinctures. I try as much as possible, but the organic brand of alcohol that I used to buy for my tinctures is now no longer available where I live. Unfortunately, I don't know why, but it's not. So, no, I don't always, but I don't always find that to be important. Not that I don't support organic farming, because I do massively. I'm a massive proponent for organic farming. I really enjoy the fact that people are getting into that and trying to take care of the environment. But if it's not feasible for you where you live, don't worry about it. A lot of people in my area make tinctures using Everclear. It's really cheap, it's really strong, and it works. You can use moonshine, you can use anything to make a tincture as long as it's 40% or higher. Then you can make a great tincture. As long as you're tolerable of the flavor, you can even use flavored drinks, flavored beverages of alcohol. The only thing to keep in mind with flavored versions is that they generally have some sugars in them, and that might cause some mold and mildew once you add in the plants. It doesn't mean it will, but it can. It makes it more of a possibility. So no, I don't always use organic alcohol for my tinctures, and that's okay. I use what's available to me at the time when I buy it. That's the most important thing, and that's one thing that foraging teaches, is that you use what's available to you instead of discounting something that you may not want to use for one small reason or another. You're really causing yourself a lot of harm and a lot more effort than what you may have to put into it. That's just how I look at it, but if you have access to organic alcohol or really want to use it, be my guest, have fun, use it, enjoy it, and support organic farms and organic producers of all kinds. Absolutely. Sometimes people are asking me where I find the unbleached coffee filters and tea sacks. I find them in my local Kroger's, my local Walmart, my local Meijer all the time. There are a couple of health food stores where I buy my food at. One of them is Earth Fare, another one is Fresh Time, and one is called the Real Food Shop. Earth Fare and Fresh Time are larger chains. The Real Food Shop is a small, local, independent place. They all have them, but I generally buy my unbleached coffee filters and tea sacks, usually in Walmart, Kroger, or Meijer, just depending on where I'm at on that day when I need them. They're like $2 a piece. They're really, really cheap for a box of like 100 of them. They're really, really cheap. Easy to find. They're usually on the bottom shelf, though, in my area. But if you live in an area where healthy stuff is a little more popular, then you might find them a little higher up on the shelves. Just take a look around your local grocery stores and see what you find in the tea aisle and the coffee aisle, and I guarantee you'll find them. Now, this last question is mainly just kind of for fun. I thought we'd have a little bit of fun with this. Am I Canadian? No, not at all. I guess to some people I sound Canadian. I don't really know how, but I guess I do. My family, on one side of my family, has been in Indiana for over 200 years, and I know that by looking back through genealogical records. The other side, or my mom's side of my family, has been in the United States for a long period of time, probably around 200 to 300 years as well. But generally, to my knowledge, my mom's side of the family actually started off, I think, in Pennsylvania. I have a lot of European blood on both sides, and I might have Native American blood, but I don't really know because I've never been able to find that information out yet. To me, it's not so much of a big deal. I don't really care whether I do or don't, because I have a massive amount of respect for the Native Americans and the things they did and still do today. Native American history and lifestyle and ways of living and things going on in the modern Native American culture are still very important to me, and I'm constantly researching and learning about it. But as far as being Canadian, no, not to my knowledge. I have nothing against Canadians. I have nothing against Canada. Canada's not a place I would ever really want to go, except maybe, some parts of Canada that border Michigan and New York and stuff like that, because there's a lot of Native American history that I'm personally interested in there. But other than that, nope, definitely not Canadian. What's this all about? So those are a lot of the questions that I get frequently, whether they be in the real world or my YouTube channel, and I hope some of this has helped you guys out, either with some of the questions you may have had that you may not have seen me answer, or some of the questions you may have been wondering yourself, or some of the things you may be wondering on how you can work around certain things when it comes to foraging or medicinal plants. And I really enjoy doing this video with you guys. It's nice to be able to do some community-oriented videos where I try to bring the community a little bit closer together and have a little bit more of a personal interaction instead of just a straight-up video on some plants or identification or a book or whatever. Either way, I really enjoyed doing this video, and I hope all of you guys enjoyed watching it. From time to time, I'll try to do some other videos like this if you guys enjoy it. If not, that's great, that's fine. But I thank all of you guys for watching, and if you want to learn more about wild edibles or medicinal plants, or even mushrooms, make sure to subscribe. I try to upload a video every week or two. It has been a little bit off-balanced. I normally upload every week. It's been about every 2 or 3 weeks recently because I'm really busy. The weather isn't really working or cooperating very well, stuff like that. But I really enjoyed making this video, and I hope all of you guys enjoyed watching it and listening to it. I thank you all for all of your support. You guys really mean a lot to me. I thank you all for your comments and questions. And hey, if there's any comments or questions that you want to leave, feel free to leave them in the comment section of this video, and I'll try to answer them. I thank all you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.